What did your partner X do that made you look at them differently? Story 1. My partner shifted my mom to our house during the COVID days. My mom was severely ill with COVID and he chose to take care of her, then move her to a hospital for isolation. We couldn't keep her with my dad since he has a lot of comorbidities and a low immunity. He did not fear getting infected from her and took care of her day and night like his own mother. He used to lift her and take her to the washroom as she was very weak and recovering from low oxygen. Story 2. He's now my husband, but before when we were close friends, we did have a connection. I thought was one-sided and never told him. Anyway, I went through a very difficult situation and opened up to him. I ended up sleeping over and cried periodically throughout the night, and he would wake up and comfort me. I basically wanted to give up, but he came up with solutions and helped me get into contact with someone who assisted me in turning things around. He was just there for me throughout the years in so many different ways. We were friends for 6 years before we got together, and I've seen him change a lot. He had his own struggles. He went to therapy and sorted himself out. He shows up for me every day, and I do the same. I lost my job not long ago, and I'm in a bit of a rut. So this morning, as he was getting ready to leave, he made me a coffee in my travel mug, told me to get ready so I could walk him to the underground station. It's sunny out, and it's his way of getting me up and out and started with my day. I told him I wanted to paint this morning, and he tried to make sure I would. I love him so much. Story 3. We had just got in my car when it was snowy and very icy out. He saw a woman we vaguely know who is nearly blind and has developmental issues trying to cross the road at a very dangerous spot, leapt out the car to help her and walked her home to make sure she was safe. He also offers to help anyone who looks like they're struggling with anything. He's a keeper. Story 4. I had a pretty severe injury that I tried to downplay for years. Sometimes when my ex was asleep, I would sneak out and sleep on our cheap couch when I was as in pain because it was a bit more comfortable. One night I did this, and as I was making up the couch, she just walked in with the blanket from the bed and laid down on the short part of the sectional, so we were head to head and went to sleep without saying anything. That relationship ended up blowing up in my face, but for a few years we were really in love, and I hope everyone gets a chance to feel that kind of love. Story 5. Said we need to buy a house big enough for my grandmother to live with us instead of her living in a retirement home. Then he found the house and remodeled the first floor to include a one-bedroom apartment for her. She lived with us for 15 years and died at home with her family around her. Now my dad lives with us in that apartment, and it is the best thing ever. Hubby is a rock star. Story 6. Stopped teaching yoga, went and got her GED at age 31, enrolled in community college, transferred to university, graduated at 7 as pregnant, took a year off to be with our daughter, got accepted to grad school, got her master's, brought in a second income for our family. Together 20 years next year, I'll never stop being impressed. Story 7. When we had just started dating, my husband kept canceling or rescheduling dates to go visit his sick friend in the hospital. It turns out the friend was real, not a made-up excuse, and had emergency brain surgery to relieve fluid buildup and pressure. He didn't have somewhere he could recover with help available, so my husband put him up in his little condo. When the tests came back that it was terminal brain cancer, he let him stay rent-free so that his disability payments would be enough to enjoy life without stressing about finances or pressure to return to work too early, and there would be someone there to help him if needed. When we had a brief period where we thought maybe he'd live longer and he went back to work full-time, the original tumor was actually seemingly defeated, but then a few months later, 2 new ones formed. My husband asked him to pay a small rent and was secretly keeping it in an account to give back to him to help get him started when he could move out. My husband rearranged his one-bedroom condo to make a permanent space in the living room so his friend could stay there, and the space was still usable. I was amazed by his kindness, and it spoke volumes about what kind of person he was and how he would handle difficult situations. For those that are wondering, we all became great friends and had fun hanging out in that condo together. But sadly, our friend passed away after about 2 years. However, he didn't have to worry about money or care, and he was happy for the time he had left. He said he didn't have a bucket list and just wanted to enjoy life with his friends and family, and he got to do that while staying out of palliative care for as long as possible. I really wish he could have seen us get married, but we dressed up the cardboard box with our portion of his ashes in a little custom box-sized suit that matched my husband's, put googly eyes on it, and it sat at the head table between us. Story 8. What hammered it into my head that I loved him, my not yet at that time partner. He came over and carried my beloved 75-pound-old collie up and down the stairs to my condo, 2x a day to toilet for months, insisted on driving us to that awful appointment with the vet, stayed with me during euthanasia, and actually was tearful as an emotionally avoidant man and collected his ashes as he knew it would be horrendous for me, then spent weeks sitting on the floor getting my new rescue to not be afraid of him. I am a very lucky woman. Believe me, I know it. Story 9. It's not as drastic as the rest, but my partner, now husband, knew I was having a bad day. I told him I just wanted mashed potatoes. If you think it's enough, add a little more type of craving. He stopped and got 3 sides of it at the Cheesecake Factory, and a slice of cheesecake as dessert on his way home from work. It was small, but showed me he was really invested in taking care of my wants, not just my needs. Story 10. Knowingly drinks till blackout. Alcoholism was a childhood trauma for me, and he knew that. We are young, but blacking out and not knowing who, what, where has made me less attracted to him. I always told him, I will not date, marry my father. I just want him to understand alcohol is okay to a certain extent. But putting innocent people at risk, or relationships, friendships at risk from your actions due to blacking out, not it. Story 11. He was repairing something with his dad, but he turned on his PS5 when his father was still explaining to him what to do, because he didn't want to lose time in the game. And when his dad gave him the electric drill, he just said, "Don't give it to me. I don't even know what to do with that." That was the turning point in which I decided I want to break up. Like we're adults, you should know a little more than just how to use a controller. Story 12. At our wedding, told everyone, wasn't it great that he had paid for the whole thing? He hadn't, my parents did. He didn't chip in a penny. Extremely embarrassing when one of his friends remarked to my mom how nice it was for X to pay. My mom didn't correct him, not her style, but it put into perspective all of the small lies I'd watched him tell to bolster his ego. Marriage didn't last long because I realized I just didn't like him as a person. Story 13. Lied about his ability to legally possess his firearms. During our entire relationship, I thought he was properly registered, licensed through proper channels, etc., etc. He lied to me, was indeed not, and is in a class of folks who cannot own guns after they committed certain crimes. While living together, if he got caught, I would have been in big trouble too, due to his actions. We divorced over a lot of things, but finding that out played a huge role. Story 14. The man who always on members of his own family for being physically abusive to their wives. But when I was talking about how big of a deal it was that he got violent with me while drinking and he needed to take it seriously, he told me, I don't know, I think it happens more than people realize and it's not that big of a deal. Story 15. When my now husband and I first started dating, I would get anxious about how much he tipped at restaurants, usually 40 to 50%, especially if he got any hint that the server might be going through a hard time. I grew up with a huge emphasis on saving money, and I thought it was irresponsible to tip so much every time. But one day I just realized being with someone more generous than me is the best thing I could ask for. I've since seen him stop everything to help so many strangers, find unique ways to get involved in our community, and just make so many people's lives better with his empathy and generosity. Story 16. XBF. He would ghost me at any minor inconvenience for up to a week. He'd brush me off constantly. Whenever I brought up anything that I had on my mind or was bothering me, he would make me cry all the time, making me feel like a bad person for asking for the bare minimum. Made me feel bad about not being able to meet up long-distance relationship when I was in a crappy spot. He missed and dismissed our 2-year anniversary, then came back to just rub it in that he moved on, and something in me clicked after waiting for 2 months for him to come back after ghosting me with no explanation. He would ignore me for hours to play a game. He would block me constantly, then suddenly return, causing me anxiety so bad I'd violently vomit. We broke up minimum once a month. By the time I got fed up waiting, I realized he wasn't who I thought he was. However, I made him special by creating a special image of him in my mind, which wasn't an accurate image of him at all. Story 17. This is so silly, but he bought a new box of Q-tips a couple months ago without prompting and put them in my bathroom drawer where they belong. He has ADHD and didn't take initiative on most things in the past. Came home last Friday from work and he had dealt with all the leaves in the yard. I had planned to do them on Saturday. Woohoo. Love him more every day. 14 years on. Story 18. We've been together maybe for a month at that point. I told him that my last relationship was bad, but I didn't say just how bad it was. When we were at his place, I spilled a glass of water and had a breakdown because I was so afraid he was going to freak out like my ex used to. I was shaking and crying and couldn't even speak. Mind you, this man didn't know just how bad my last relationship was, and for him, I was having a breakdown over a spilled glass of water. He didn't know what was wrong with me, couldn't make it stop, but he held me. He held me and hugged me for hours while I cried and shook. After it passed, I gave him a more thorough summary of my last relationship, and he helped me get better and stood by me every single step of the way. I love him so much. Story 19. When my mother was terminally ill, we wanted to try a natural form of medication as our last form of hope, but it was really expensive. My sibling and I scraped our money together to get it for her. My husband, then boyfriend, not even engaged, said he would pay towards it too so we could buy a longer supply. He actually paid more than me and my sibling because he could. I didn't even have to ask him. He did it because he knew how much my mom meant to me and how desperate we were, and he never wanted to money back because we are a couple and share. I already loved him, of course, but that moment I realized that he's such a selfless person and really want to spend the rest of my life with him. He asked my father permission to propose to me not long before my mom passed away, so she at least knew about it. Story 20. I had been out of the country for a week, and when I got home after 20 hours of traveling, she wasn't home. Found her at our dorm bar with our cousin. When I said hi, she just said welcome home like I had been gone for the day, and then returned to talking with her cousin. That was the beginning of the end, and when I started noticing the signs that she didn't love me, was just with me for convenience, and was really taking me for granted. Story 21. Wanted to say getting strangled unconscious, but I guess not because later got back together. I think it was this incident a year later. A big ovarian cyst gave me abdominal hemorrhaging and needed to be operated, but blood work moved my operation by a week. Had a 40C fever from an H1N1 virus. He demanded I split and share my antivirals with him until he gets a prescription too. Said he was feeling an itch in his throat all of a sudden. At home, I needed help with tasks, like dog walks. The -20°C outside hurt to breathe. While arguing how he doesn't want to help, he said, I must not be so sick if I have the energy to get this angry. Tried kicking him out, he grabbed me by my arm. Seething, I threatened with police, and that was it. I reached some kind of boiling point, figuratively and literally LOL. Story 22. Jealousy issues all throughout our relationship. Always asked to check my phone. Didn't have an issue since I'm faithful as hell. Went long distance, and she always worried I'd met someone else. Called me crying about it several times. She broke up with me, suddenly blaming the distance and other factors. Guess who posted pictures with her new BF a couple of weeks later? Man, I was considering uprooting my life for this girl, and now I feel like all she wanted was whoever was around available. I put up with almost 2 years of some of the most insane jealousy you can imagine, just for her to be the one to do all the things she was worried I'd do. Story 23. The way she handled taking care of our first child the first few weeks after going home from the hospital. We had already married, and I loved her, but the way she just naturally transformed into such a caring and diligent mother. She had never done this before, yet she seemed like a seasoned pro, took all the difficult days and sleepless nights with such grace and love. It was truly an impressive and beautiful thing to see. I knew then our kids and family would always be loved and cared for. She's been so great as a wife and mother. I hope I can always make her happy and never lose her. Story 24. He called me on my birthday around 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. and asked if no one was taking me out repeatedly with chuckles. Some weeks later, he told me that he slept with another girl. Send me her name and pictures. Meanwhile, I didn't ask for any. I decided not to quarrel him, but he still got upset that I wasn't angry about what he did. For my mental and emotional safety, I had to call it a quit. Story 25. Made me pick up food, pasta with sauce. He had dropped onto the floor with my own hands, despite knowing that I have sensory issues that cause me to gag uncontrollably if I touch food with my hands. Only things I can touch are dry foods like bread. I'm autistic, so it's not just not liking it, it's literally unbearable for me. Begged him to let me use the sweeper. We didn't have any towels, so that at least I wouldn't have to touch it. Did it in front of his friends and mocked me. I just left him on Thursday. Story 26. Yell at me for costing him $2 on a miscalculation. Tell me it's my fault for being in a previous abusive relationship. This was ironic. And another occasion told me to jump in a trash bag because he was going to put trash out. I didn't appreciate the joke, but apparently he said I was too sensitive and can't take jokes. There's so much more. I don't know why I put up with so much. Story 27. Yesterday I told my partner that during a doctor visit I'd scheduled to discuss new symptoms, the doc felt something in my abdomen and sent me to have same-day imaging done. My husband replied, I'm sorry, that must be rough. I'm thinking of strengthening my core during workouts. I think it'll make my squats better. This morning, when I brought up how that hurt my feelings, he argued why he thought I didn't want to talk about it and not once tried to console me or make it up to me. So probably that. Story 28. We had their parents over for a chat, watching TV, etc. She came into the room and announced she had just had a miscarriage. Without stopping or waiting, just asked so who wanted coffee and walked off. We just sat stunned at the revelation. Now we didn't know she was pregnant. Wasn't planned, but still stung like hell that she didn't tell me in private or show the slightest bit of sadness or even care. Never really forgave her for that. We divorced more than 20 years ago, but still think how weird it was when these questions pop up. Story 29. During the later stages of COVID, he was working 15-hour shifts for NHS. I was in India, he was in UK, so there was a bit of a time zone difference, and the only time we could talk was during his 1.5-hour-long commute back home. During one such call, I saw him quietly get up from his seat and give it up for an aged man and smile at him. It was a small gesture. He didn't realize I saw him, but it still told me the type of person he was. He's the type of person who would work 15-hour shifts and do home visits for elderly patients during COVID, who would give up his seat for a stranger with a smile, who would stand out in the snow to get a better signal to talk to me for 5 extra mins. I love him. Story 30. I grew up never learning how to drive in the snow, never had to, but it often snowed where I went to school. In college when it snowed, my boyfriend, now husband, would always go and grocery shop, run errands with me when it snowed until I felt comfortable driving alone. I knew he was life partner material. Story 31. When we moved into a new apartment, my mom came with my sister to help without telling him beforehand. He knew about my sister and her boyfriend, but my mom came along because she had the day off. So my mom had a hip failure and struggled to walk, and when she came in, my ex said to my sister's boyfriend, "What is the cripple doing here?" That was the end of us. Story 32. I was in an international long-distance relationship, and my boyfriend at the time was flying to the US to see me. I was very ill with a chronic illness and urgently had to be sent to the hospital. He was still in his own country about to get on a flight, so I called him and told him that I was going to likely be in the hospital all week, so if he didn't want to come, it was okay and I'd understand. He came anyway and spent the whole week with me in the hospital. Didn't complain once. Brought my books and laptop to me every day and spent hours just sitting next to me playing Mario Kart on my Switch. This was 2022 and we got married a month ago. Story 33. When we were less than a year into dating, he invited me to his brother's wedding. His half-brother, whom I'd never met, proceeded to be combative and antagonistic with me about everything, frequently looking me up and down, lingering on my cleavage. I've always been a fighter with Thai men, so I gave the half-brother a piece of my mind over lunch. We walked back to our hotel, but I was so uncomfortable at one point that I was shaking while we were getting ready for the actual ceremony. My partner, furious, called his family and threatened to leave the wedding right then and there. I still remember him pacing around the bathroom in just shoes and the nice pants from the suit we picked out together, interrupting his mom to say, "No, you need to listen to me. No talking, no excuses." Throughout the entire wedding, he was my shield against his half-brother, and we left promptly the next day after lunch. No one, not even my biological dad, had stood up for me with their own family before. I was always told I had to just deal or, well, their family, but he knew exactly how uncomfortable I was and didn't question me at all. He said once he saw the behavior, he couldn't unsee it and it just disgusted him. My partner refuses to ever see his half-brother again and has been deeply protective of me with his family since. I still think about that a lot. Story 34 started treating random strangers on occasion like, mostly store employees or customer care reps over the phone, over minor inconveniences and whatnot, usually out of the employee's hands. It would sometimes end with her screaming at the person and storming off or flipping out on them on the phone. First time I saw her do, it was really shocking and set the tone for the rest of the relationship after that. Story 35. As a single mother, I started dating again and met this guy online. He showed up and took my son to the park together. He was almost 3 at the time. My son immediately sat in mud and I had to carry him home, clean him up, and my date didn't bat an eye. On our second date, my dad came from out of state to visit, so he immediately got the dad test. Vibes matched, obviously. A month into us dating, I broke my collarbone after getting hit by a truck on my bike. He rushed to take care of me even though he couldn't come into the hospital. COVID restrictions. Not even a year into us dating, my mother passed and he took care of me, never leaving my side, even came to her funeral with me. 2 months after that, I got full custody because my ex-husband messed up really bad and ended up in a psych ward for a couple weeks. My BF didn't bat an eye. He helped me in every way he could with my son. Not long after, my 12-year-old dog passed on my mom's B-day. He held me and we cried together. Since then, we've gotten a puppy together, and it feels like our family is complete. We've been together for 4.5 years now, and he is the best thing that's ever happened to my son and I. He's never let us down. He always builds us up, and we do the same for him. I swear I never actually knew true romantic love until I met him, my best friend. Story 36. We were only dating at the time, but I asked him if he could take a look at my car for me because the windshield wiper fluid pump wasn't working. He told me it wouldn't be a problem. He's never worked on my make of car before, and apparently it's incredibly difficult, but he's a super good mechanic, so he spent hours watching YouTube videos to fix it for me. On top of that, he fixed everything that looked like it needed to be replaced and never charged me for it or even told me about it. Married 2 years this May. Story 37. He took my phone off me and called my mom off it, forced me to talk to her about our infertility struggles I'd been keeping from her for months. He knew she'd be able to make me feel better when he wasn't able to. I knew in that moment I'd married the right man and he'd always try to help me through the hard times. Story 38. My partner is not an animal person, but I love my cat. Despite his initial reluctance to owning a pet, when we moved in together, he accepted the cat as a member of the family. When I had to put down my beloved cat, he was next to me the whole time, holding both me and the cat while I sobbed. He was also crying himself and told me this is why he didn't want a pet initially. He's dealt with loss a lot more than I have, so I realized he's scared to experience grief again. We've got a new cat now, and she's loving but also a nutcase compared to my sweet old cat, and they've got their own special bond. Story 39. I'd been in love with this man for almost 5 years in an off-and-on relationship. No matter what he did, I just could not manage to fall out of love with him, and I'd take him back every time he wandered back into my life. One day he came home from the strip club after lying to me about where he was, and I asked if I could look at his phone. He agreed, and I discovered him dropping into girls' DMs on Instagram multiple times without them replying, including at least one stripper from the club he'd been at that night, asking her if she was going to be in. No replies. These girls were ignoring him, and he was still risking our relationship and willing to hurt me to message them. Some kind of switch just flipped inside me. I was still so hurt and sad as I packed my things and moved out of his apartment, but I didn't love him anymore. After realizing all I didn't know about him, I don't think I ever loved him. I loved an idea I'd created in my head, which is why it was so difficult to get over him. But the real him, I don't even really like that guy, let alone love him. Story 40. When he listened to advice I give him, seeing him active listening, then going and doing what I suggested, so refreshing. For me, that means he is open to suggestions, doesn't think he is always right or now what's the best. X was so egocentric, he always thought he knows more than me, even when it comes to my professional opinion in which I have a lot of experience. Story 41. Decided to break up 3 days before New Year's plans to instantly hook up with her now partner who was just a friend. I was never allowed to see a month before the breakup, but trusted her as I knew her 8 years. Completely shattered me as I was having nightmares about it, and she reassured me the day of the breakup and broke up with me as I was seeking support. Then my last proper ex emotionally cheating on me 4 months in when I was 100% on the relationship. Never fell so hard in my life. I forgave her, but I couldn't look at her the same for the 4 years. After the relationships I've had at 22, I've given up on love. I constantly get cheated on because I'm boring and uninteresting. My exes are in happy relationships. I'll probably be in a box by the end of the year. Story 42. She spent the money we were going to use to move on a new car, and that's when she told me we were staying in that city. Also, when she said my job means nothing and doesn't care if I lost my job or not, that my contributions to our household meant nothing to her. The sad week I had. Story 43. Lost my grandpa and dog that my family got when I was 6 after 14 years, in the span of 1 month. Somehow during that time, my now ex-GEF managed to blame me for pulling her mood down because I was not silly, goofy enough for her, then proceeded to jump out of the car during a heated argument where she swore and shouted while I remained calm. Tried for a few more weeks. I was never the same in that relationship. Story 44. When I was in hospital, she complained to me for hours over text about how I'm fine and that I should discharge myself early without any treatment administered. After 7 hours of waiting, I finally got treatment but had to stay for a couple more hours for blood results. She went crazy over the phone just because I said it would have been nice for you to be here. Instead, she just wanted to play video games with her friends. I broke up with her a week later. She couldn't figure out why. Story 45. I was just on FaceTime with him the other night, and he thought I couldn't hear the audio of the porn he was watching. All I hear is him breathing hard and the phone moving up and down. It's been a few days I haven't brought it up, but it's really bothering me. I knew that he watched porn often. I just wish he didn't do it right in front of me. He could have just hung up first. Story 46. I had a really traumatic birth and couldn't walk for months due to a C-section I was put under for. Our baby wouldn't latch to feed or sleep for almost a year. Not only did my husband change my diapers and clean my incision because I was too scared to look at it, but he fed me every single meal in bed and meal prepped for us before he had to go back to work. Even though I was a stay-at-home mom and he worked, he slept on the floor next to my son's crib to wake up with him for the first 10 months of his life. I will never, ever forget his sacrifice and kindness. He never made me feel like less of a mom for it not working out the way I'd wished. Me and our son truly think he hung the moon. I had never known a love like that, even though he'd loved me pretty darn well for many years prior. You really never forget how someone treats you during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. I would never wish something badly to happen to him, but I will care for him forever, And if the time ever comes, I'll try to be there for him like he was for me. Lots of run-on sentences, but you get the point, LOL. Story 47. We went out on a couple dates and I liked him, but I wasn't drawn to him that strongly, and I think it was mutual. A couple weeks later, I saw him at a show, and he was tipsy and dancing like nobody was watching. I wanted a part of that. A switch flipped and I changed my mind. We started dating and then he cheated on me a few months later. My mind changed back. Story 48. A few weeks ago, I came out to someone I work with as bisexual. Hours after that, he called me a slur. I am a 30-year-old woman. I have no idea how to even process something like that. I've lived my whole life in the closet. Went home to my husband afterwards and tearfully told him everything about being bisexual, being in love with my childhood friend, in the past, obviously not currently, feeling like an imposter because I don't really get to explore that part of life since I'm married to a man, and the thing that had happened with my coworker. My husband held me while I cried and told me I can be gay and still be married to a man. It was like he had removed an ever-expanding balloon from my chest. I don't think I'll ever feel unsafe sharing anything with him now. Most men I have interacted with would have taken the whole meltdown as an assault on their masculinity or questioned my loyalty. Reckon I chose well. Story 49. The first one, after only a couple dates, we were just out driving down an old Forest Service road, and there was a bag of garbage someone had chucked into the ditch, and he slammed on the brakes and hopped out and threw it in the box of his truck, then hopped back in, saying how disgusting some people are. The best one, 5 years ago, I had come home from a particularly challenging day at work telling him how unhappy with it I was, and he said, "What would you be doing if you could?" And I said, "Law school," and he just said, "So do it," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. So now I'm 34, just applied to a bunch of law schools, the closest of which is 9 hours away. And he has every intention of moving us and our 2 kids to wherever I have to go for 3 years if I get accepted somewhere. I knew he was a supportive guy, but I didn't know he'd let me completely disrupt our successful and fulfilling lives for my dream. Story 50 ignored me and ghosted the week of Valentine's Day before the COVID outbreak for several days. She was hiding some shady, lying by omission, and her selfish behavior was to leave me completely in the dark for her benefit. Selfish liar, but also a coward. Next time it happened, I just decided to assume the worst in her. Years stolen. Adored that person. Either she was never real and just an act, or she changed. Story 51. He just watched and remained quiet when his mother explained for an hour why I'm not good enough for his son and that I'm too stupid, that I will never get my dream job, and that I'm as crazy as the last 4 ex-girlfriends and I should go see a psychiatrist. After I cleaned her house, got her groceries, managed her Instagram account, she is an artist, and took care of the garden for 2 months straight, and after I gave my last money to her son. He later said then, "Don't be so sensitive, you know how my mother is, deal with it." Something died that day. I understood that he will never take my side and is completely indifferent, and a mama's boy as the following month showed then. Story 52. Sounds like a small incident to a lot of people, but it was unforgettable for me. While we were dating, we walked past a car park barrier that came down, and it hit his head. His spectacles flew across the road, and injury seemed really serious. Instead of saying ouch or look for his specs, or just how a normal injured person would react, he just held his head and exclaimed, "OMG, thankfully it didn't hit you. Wait, it didn't hit you, right?" In a raw, instinctual kind of tone. For someone who didn't have a lot of love in my own family and was never prioritized in my fam, I knew there and then that he was the one for me. Fast forward 12 years in, we have been married for years and have 2 little babies and a rescue dog. Story 53. I invited him to an alumni party for my school I attended. It's a private/boarding school with like 80 generations of graduates, so a lot of the attendees were way older. And we were seated with 2 other former students, they're probably 75 plus. He was super attentive to their stories, chatted, and actually listened to them. Since this party is held every 5 years, at a point they got emotional and said this might be the last party they attend since they were getting older, and both cried a bit. He was so compassionate he gave them his own party favors. I then knew he genuinely was a good person. I knew this already, but I had never seen that on someone. Super genuine, gentle, and emphatic. I remember I even teared up low. Story 54. I was in treatment for addiction, and he came to visit me intoxicated. The staff immediately told him to leave, and I didn't know he had been there until later that day. It was a wake-up call for me. He ended up passing from his own addiction a few years later, and I've been sober for almost 18 years. Story 55 started pulling back. Her reasons were valid, but in my mind it was because I'd done something wrong, so I got really insecure and defensive, which just drove her further away, which magnified the villainous lens I viewed her through, etc. Now that I know to look out for that reaction in myself, I could treat her with so much more care, but I think I wisened up too late. Sucks. because I wanted her to be my partner, to explore space and time with. Story 56, he stopped littering. Before we were dating, he was driving me around one time and he threw a water bottle out the window. I told him littering was gross and trashy. Badummed. He defended it at the time, saying it was his land anyway. He's native from a tribe that is from the state we're in. And it's already ruined from all the bull, so we dropped it. Years later, and we're dating. He took me on a walk to show me his new neighborhood and bought us some Gatorade while we were out. When we finished drinking, he held on to the bottles until we found a trash can. It kind of seems small and silly now that I read it back, but damn, it just felt really, really nice to see that change. 3. Story 57. I wasn't a good partner in my last relationship. I was very depressed, very angry, and instead of seeking help, I drank, pushed her away and drank. We split, rightfully so. I went away. Seemingly got healthy, but the expectation of life is getting better didn't hit me and fell back into drinking again. Before that, we made up, communicated. We were very much in love, but knew it wasn't working or ever going to. Then the communication stopped. I saw her on the street and she practically ran away from me. That's what changed my perspective. She was even unwilling to say hello to me. Wake up call. It took a little bit to get my head in order and realize how sick, mentally ill I actually was, not just drunk. I'm aware and bear the burden of responsibility for what a mess I turned that relationship into, and still do cry and feel the feelings nearly 2 years later. But I'm 5 months sober. I had an operation of a very deadly infection that I nearly died from, coma and septic shock. I came out the other side of that more aware, with my anxiety and depression feeling lower than they ever have been. Take notice of yourself, take care of yourself, love yourself, be confident in your choices and always pay attention. Not just to yourself, but to your partner's wants and needs. Also, be confident to have standards in a relationship. If I may be honest, I bent over backwards for that relationship, doing things I didn't really believe in because I loved that person that much. That's okay. I'm happier, still have depression. I'm definitely healthier, and I'm working on myself. Story 58. 2 weeks ago, I cut my finger with a bread knife while trying to slice a frozen English muffin for breakfast. The knife slipped, and I ended up with a deep cut on the tip of my finger. At first, I didn't realize how bad it was, but when I saw the blood pouring out, I panicked. I ran to my boyfriend, who was studying at his computer, holding my injured finger tightly. We'd been dating exclusively for a little over a year, and at that moment, I expected him to just bring me to the emergency room, handle things efficiently, and leave it at that. But what he did was so much more. He supported me emotionally in a way I didn't anticipate. He immediately got up, wrapped my finger to stop the bleeding, and said, "We need to go to emergency." I was starting to have a panic attack, but he stayed calm, guided me to sit down, helped me breathe, and even cleaned up the blood on my hands. When I started worrying about the cost, especially as someone not from here, he reassured me, saying, "Let's just go to the clinic next door. I'll take care of it." It was an exclusive emergency clinic with a $350 upfront cost, but he didn't hesitate for a second. We rushed over, and he stayed by my side the entire time, holding my hand, calming me down, and making sure I felt supported while I got my stitches. In the end, I ended up with 7 stitches and lost a bit of nerve sensation in my finger, but I couldn't be happier knowing I have such an amazing partner by my side. It made me love him even more.